All right, buckle up everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into a topic that never fails to stir up a good debate: ancient aliens. We've got a YouTube video with some pretty wild theories, and honestly, I'm kind of pumped to break this down with you.
Yeah, it's amazing how these theories, often get brushed aside as fringe stuff, but they touch on some really deep questions about our place in the universe. Like, are we really alone out here? Where did we even come from? It makes sense why these possibilities kind of grab people's attention.
For sure. And just to be upfront, we're not here to convince anyone of anything. Our goal today is to unpack the stuff they're claiming in this video and let you decide what you think.
Exactly. That's important, especially with a topic like this where everyone's got strong opinions. It's about exploring the info and coming to your own conclusions.
All right, so this video jumps right in, saying that human DNA might actually have a hidden message from, wait for it, extraterrestrial beings. They talk about these two researchers, Vladimir Sherbak and Maxim Makukov, who spent over a decade, seriously analyzing the human genome.
And what they found were these pretty interesting repeating patterns. Specifically, 9 multiples of the number 37 just kind of scattered throughout our genetic code. And statistically speaking, the chances of this happening randomly, like by pure chance, are slim to none.
So they're basically saying it's too precise, too organized to be a natural thing, like someone or something deliberately put this code in there.
That's the argument they're making. And it actually got the attention of other scientists, even some big names, like Francis Crick, the guy who co-discovered the structure of DNA.
Whoa, hold on. So even someone like Crick thought there might be something to this alien DNA thing. That's pretty wild. But if it's such a big deal, why isn't this theory, universally accepted by scientists?
Well, that's where things get a little murky. See, the patterns are there, no doubt about it, but proving they're like a message on purpose and not just some natural process we haven't figured out yet, that's the tough part. Think of it like this. We might see a cloud formation that's a perfect circle. Super cool, right? But does that mean someone drew it there? Not necessarily.
Okay, so maybe the science isn't settled on this whole DNA thing. But what's interesting is that the video then tries to connect this to, get this, ancient myths and stories from, all over the world.
Oh, yeah. They bring up the Sumerian creation myth, the one with the Anunnaki, these super powerful beings who supposedly made humans to do their work for them. And then you've got the Mayan creation story in the Popol Vuh, where, again, deities are talking about humans as servants.
It's almost like this idea of humanity being created by something bigger than us, maybe even for their own reasons. That's a story we've been telling ourselves for a long time. It definitely feeds into the whole ancient alien narrative.
What's fascinating here is that these myths probably reflect some deeper human anxieties, about our origins and our place in the universe. The idea that we were created, intentionally made, rather than evolving, might be comforting to some people, even if the creator isn't exactly what we'd expect.
So maybe it's not about taking these ancient stories literally, but more about understanding why we feel the need to explain where we came from. Right.
Exactly. And we got to remember that myths are stories passed down over generations. Details get changed, lost, or reinterpreted along the way.
Speaking of stories, this video dives into something that really caught my attention: the Epic of Gilgamesh. Apparently, they're saying his tomb was actually found back in 2003.
Yeah, there was this team led by a German archaeologist, Jörg Fassbinder. They made this big announcement about a discovery in a rock. They were totally convinced that the structures they found matched the descriptions from the epic, even pointing out what they thought were ancient gardens and fields.
No way. Imagine if they found actual evidence, like maybe even DNA, that connects this legendary figure to, real history. That would be insane.
Well, there's a catch. Because of all the political stuff going on, the security concerns in the region, the research got shut down, completely stopped.
So the tomb is just sitting there, unexplored. Talk about a cliffhanger.
But even if they could excavate it, how could they be sure it's actually Gilgamesh's tomb? I mean, we're talking thousands of years ago. Archaeology, especially in places with conflict, is really tricky. Even if the structures match up, confirming it's the tomb of a specific person from that long ago, that takes a lot of evidence. And there's no guarantee they'd find it.
All right, so maybe Gilgamesh's DNA is off the table for now, but let's switch gears a bit. This video goes on to explore this idea that artists throughout history might have been capturing evidence of alien contact in their work, without even realizing it. It's almost like they're saying, hey, look closer. The proof is hidden in plain sight.
And this is where we get into interpretation and pareidolia, that thing where our brains try to see familiar patterns in random shapes, even when they aren't really there.
Okay, I need an example. I'm not getting it.
Sure, they talk about these prehistoric cave paintings in Algeria at a place called Tasselina Yerger. Some people look at certain figures and say, hey, those are spacesuits, and those things next to them, those are flying saucers.
Wait, are you serious? Cave paintings of spaceships. That sounds a little out there, don't you think? What do most experts say about these paintings?
Most archaeologists and art historians, they interpret those images based on the culture that made them. They're usually seen as spiritual beliefs or symbols representing their world, not aliens.
So maybe not aliens, but still pretty cool to see how people thousands of years ago were trying to understand the world around them, just like we are today.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, are we doing the same thing, projecting our modern fascination with aliens onto the past when we look at ancient art?
You know what? That's a really good point. It's like we're searching for evidence to back up what we already believe, even if the original meaning was something totally different.
It all comes back to that human need to find connections, to make sense of things we don't understand. It's that same drive that pushes us to learn and discover, whether it's about the universe, our history, or even art.
Well, we've covered DNA, myths, tombs, even cave paintings. It feels like we're just scratching the surface here, even though this video has a lot of interesting ideas.
We are just getting started. When we come back, we'll dig even deeper into this stuff, exploring the arguments for and against the possibility of ancient aliens. So stick with us. This is going to get good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into ancient alien theories.
Right before the break, we were talking about how, people throughout history have always tried to make sense of the unknown.
Yeah, and sometimes they incorporated those ideas directly into their art,
Exactly. The video we're looking at today had some examples, like those cave paintings we talked about, and a few others that really stood out to me. There was one, The Annunciation. It's a painting from the 15th century by Carlo Crivelli.
Oh, yeah, that one. It depicts the angel Gabriel,
Yeah.
telling Mary that she will give birth to Jesus.
Right. And there's this, beam of light coming down from a circular object in the sky, and it's striking Mary right on the head. It looks so much like a UFO, almost like Crivelli was, sneaking a little alien intrigue into this religious scene. It's definitely a detail that's gotten people talking. Some art historians will say that it's just a symbolic representation of the Holy Spirit, which is, pretty common in religious art. But of course, others see it as, well, maybe something extraterrestrial.
The video also mentions a bunch of other pieces with weird objects in the sky, like there's a tapestry from Belgium, 16th century, and even an 18th century painting of Jesus' baptism with something that looks a lot like a UFO just hovering above.
Really makes you think about how people, all throughout history have perceived and represented things they just couldn't explain.
Like they were leaving visual breadcrumbs for us to decipher.
But separating real evidence from, imagination or misinterpretations, that can be pretty tough. It's important to keep in mind that our understanding of the past is always changing. We're always finding new things, new perspectives.
So, okay, let's talk about the ancient astronaut theory itself for a second. This whole idea that extraterrestrials visited Earth way back when and that they shaped human civilization.
This theory really likes to point to things like the pyramids of Egypt or the massive statues on Easter Island, those giant structures that seem way too advanced for their time. People who support this theory say there's no way these ancient cultures could have built them without help from, well, aliens.
I can see how that's tempting. When you think about something like the pyramids, the sheer size, the complex engineering, it's hard to imagine how they did it with the tools they had back then.
It's important to remember, though, that just because we don't totally understand how they did something doesn't mean aliens were involved. Just because there isn't evidence doesn't mean it didn't happen that way. And, we've actually learned a lot about ancient building techniques.
So we shouldn't underestimate ancient civilizations, right?
Yeah.
They were pretty smart.
Exactly. Take the pyramids, for example. We now have a much better idea of how the Egyptians got those giant stones from the quarries, how they moved them, how they lifted them into place. It was incredible, a real testament to their engineering, but not necessarily, proof of aliens.
It's fun to imagine alien architects, but they're often more down-to-earth explanations, based on human creativity and innovation.
Of course. Doesn't mean we should just toss out the ancient astronaut theory entirely, though. We gotta keep an open mind, right? But we also need to be a little skeptical. We need solid evidence, not just speculation.
So speaking of evidence, What kind of proof would it take to convince you, as a skeptic, that aliens might have actually visited Earth?
That's a good question. For me, it would have to be something undeniably extraterrestrial, something that we couldn't explain with any known human technology or, natural phenomenon, something we know for sure isn't from here.
Like what would that even look like?
Well, imagine if we found something, an ancient artifact, let's say, made from a material that doesn't exist on Earth,
Hmm.
or a structure with technology that's like light years ahead of anything we know ancient civilizations could have created. Something like that would be hard to ignore.
So we're talking like the smoking gun, the irrefutable proof that would make even the biggest skeptic say, okay, maybe there's something to this. But even if we found something like that, wouldn't it just lead to even more questions?
Absolutely. Finding something like that wouldn't necessarily prove every part of the ancient astronaut theory, right? It would just mean that we have a whole lot more to learn, a whole lot more to discover, but it would definitely change how we see history, and our place in the universe.
Okay, so the ancient astronaut theory is one thing, but this video also goes into this idea that humans, like us, might actually be descended from extraterrestrials. That's a whole other level of wow.
Right. They link this back to, those claims about hidden messages in our DNA. Some people believe that aliens either directly genetically engineered humans or that maybe we're the result of interbreeding between extraterrestrials and early hominids, like our ancient ancestors.
So, like, we're part alien ourselves.
It's a cool thought, but scientifically speaking, there's no proof of that. I mean, our DNA clearly shows our connection to primates, chimpanzees, gorillas. We're part of the evolutionary tree right here on Earth. We fit in right here.
So, maybe not alien ancestors, but still, it's interesting to think about the possibilities.
It all comes back to that human curiosity.
Yeah.
We want to know where we came from, how we fit into the grand scheme of things. And even if some of these theories seem, I don't know, a little far-fetched, it's that curiosity that drives exploration, that drives discovery.
Well, as we've seen so far, there are way more questions than answers when it comes to this whole ancient alien thing.
And that's okay. The search for knowledge, it's all about asking those questions, exploring different ideas, challenging ourselves to think critically. It's the journey, not just the destination.
So in our last segment, we'll wrap things up by looking at some of the bigger implications of these theories and what they tell us about that human need to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, and we'll leave you with some things to think about, some resources, so you can keep exploring this stuff on your own. This is a fascinating topic, so many rabbit holes to go down. So stick around, we're about to get into the most thought-provoking part of our deep dive.
All right, welcome back. So far, we've dug into some pretty wild ideas about ancient aliens. Everything from secret messages in our DNA to, like, UFOs popping up in Renaissance art. It's been a pretty crazy ride.
It really has. And, we're still searching for that solid proof, that one piece of evidence that says, yep, aliens were here.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder, why are we so obsessed with this idea? Why do we find ancient aliens so fascinating?
Well, it's a question that goes beyond just, science. It gets into, like, human psychology. I mean, we've always looked up at the stars and wondered if we're alone.
It's that big question, right?
Yeah.
Are we the only ones out here?
Exactly. And for some people, the idea that, maybe we were visited by these advanced beings way back when, it gives them a sense of, I don't know, connection to something bigger, something beyond ourselves.
Like we're part of this giant cosmic family. Or maybe our existence has some greater purpose, something more than what we see every day.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. It could also be a way to find meaning, especially in a world that can feel kind of chaotic and unpredictable sometimes. Having that connection to something bigger can be comforting.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it brings up so many other questions, too. Like, if aliens did influence our past, why haven't we heard from them, recently? Where'd they go?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Some people think, well, maybe they're just watching us from afar, waiting for the right time to, like, make contact again.
Or maybe, like the video suggested, they left us clues.
Right, and maybe those clues are hidden in these ancient myths and symbols, or even, like some believe, in our DNA.
Like a cosmic scavenger hunt, waiting for us to figure it out.
That's a cool way to think about it. But, even if we never find that absolute proof that aliens were here, the search itself, the questioning, it still has value.
In what way? What do you mean?
Well, it forces us to think critically, right?
Yeah.
To question what we think we know, to be open to new ideas. It reminds us that there's still so much we don't know about the universe, about our place in it all.
You know what? I think that's a really important point. Whether you believe in ancient aliens or not, just exploring these ideas, it makes you look at history, at the world around us, in a new way.
Exactly. It challenges us to consider different perspectives, to keep searching for those answers.
Well, it looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive, and it seems like we've ended up with more questions than answers. But maybe that's okay.
Yeah, I think you're right. Maybe the real impact of this whole ancient alien thing isn't about, proving or disproving alien contact. Maybe it's about something bigger.
What do you mean?
It's about keeping that sense of wonder alive, that curiosity about the world. It's about pushing the limits of our knowledge, of our imagination.
And never being afraid to ask those big questions, right?
Exactly. So keep looking up at those stars, keep exploring, and never lose that sense of wonder.
Who knows? Maybe one day we'll find that one piece of evidence that changes everything. But until then, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of ancient aliens. It's been a blast.